What's up, everybody? Welcome to the January 20th, 2026 IndiView Weekly Market Update. I'm Jeremy Bryan, and this is brought to you by IndiWealth. Today, we're going to get right into those hot button issues that are going on in the market. So let's not waste any time and let's go. First off, let's talk about Trump threats about Greenland. We seem to be pretty focused on acquiring, buying, whatever may be Greenland for reasons that defy logic at this point right now, in my opinion. But who knows? Maybe there is some soundness behind it, but I failed to see it too much at this point right now. But nonetheless, we're talking about now tariffing countries for threats to help ease the bridge to doing this, and whether that's compromise, whether that's financial concerns, whatever that may be, we're talking about more tariffs as a result of that. And the markets, at least this morning, were not reacting favorably to this. Remember that all this tariff stuff is in the air from multiple avenues right now, right? So tariffs from who we're going to tariff and how much, where we're going to tariff, how much we're going to allow for exceptions, what we're going to be counter tariffed on, and not the least important of is what the Supreme Court eventually rules about the legality of certain of these tariffs. Now, even when they rule on that, this is not over, because there are other avenues, and they've discussed already other avenues and approaches that if the Supreme Court finds the current level of tariffs unconstitutional, there's other avenues where some of this can be implemented in a different fashion. We'll see where all this ends up. Why I'm telling you all of this is, again, this is going back to our theme from our market update and outlook, and probably the theme for a little while here is there is a ton of political noise right now that is making it very hard to ignore Washington in order to do what you need to do from your portfolios. But still, from our perspective, that is largely noise. 99% of this, again, is not going to influence what you are doing in your portfolios. It is very difficult to trade on this stuff. Again, we don't know anything with regard to concrete capability. We have no foresight on that. And secondarily, we don't know the ramifications of that and the unforeseen consequences of these actions if they were to take place. And largely, we don't know the market's reaction to it. So again, focus on the things you can control here. You cannot control Trump and Greenland. And whatever this may be, and how long ever it takes. You can't control that, but you can control what is in your portfolio, the risks you're taking, the objectives that you're doing, in your time horizon. Continue to focus on that. Turning to number two on the economic front a little bit, we talked about inflation and the potential reacceleration of inflation based upon tariffs. I said this in my market update and outlook piece, and I agree. We're not seeing it through the numbers just yet. I mean, inflation is still above expectation, or what we consider controlled inflation, right? With the targeted inflation of that 2 to 2.5% that the Fed is looking at. But the inflation numbers aren't getting rampantly out of control. They're not massively accelerating. Now, some of the underlying components are, especially, food seems to be reaccelerating here a little bit, which is a bad thing. We're keeping an eye on oil and gas. Now, those inputs, food and energy, don't really get put into what they call core inflation. That gets put into headline, which is everything, but core is what people really kind of look at to examine what the pricing environment looks like. And really, that pricing environment isn't getting substantially worse. Now, it's not getting substantially better is the other component of it. But we aren't seeing a massive reacceleration at this point yet from all the tariffs. And again, all that rhetoric and all the changes really make it hard to get a good, solid determination of how much of inflation is being affected, or how much tariffs are affecting inflation. It's hard to get that assessment. So from this side right now, what we're looking at is just the core numbers. And the core numbers are still elevated. They're still above where we need to be, but they're not out of control. So it'll be interesting to see what the Federal Reserve talks about. Their preferred number is the personal consumption expenditure, or the PCE index. They like that one a little bit more. We'll see where that number shakes out and what that looks like. But just general inflation numbers at this point right now, where we sit right now, aren't spiraling out of control, but they're not decelerating to the area where we would call them in that targeted sweet spot yet. Turning to number three, we're in earnings season now. Last week kind of really kicked us off, and we're in the heart of it right now. So these next 2 weeks are going to be pretty busy with earnings. I wanted to talk about financials first. Financials was largely done. Most of the big firms reported last week, and to be honest, their numbers were okay. It wasn't rock star, but most of them beat earnings. Some, I think Wells Fargo had probably the most substantial miss on earnings. But Goldman Sachs significantly beat earnings. So it's ebbs and flows a little bit there. But the general perception post their earnings reports was a little bit of malaise. Now, financials had worked very well coming into earnings. And so I think a lot of this right now is more sell the news type of stuff. There wasn't anything in and of the reports themselves that suggested a massive trajectory change. I don't think you're going to see earnings estimates change drastically, either positively or negatively, based upon what the financials are saying. And general conditions seem to be still relatively okay right now. And especially mergers and acquisitions, or M&A activity, is really, people are starting to talk about that as potential accelerant in 2026. So we'll see how that shakes out. That can be notorious. That can be pretty finicky. But overall, we'll see where it shakes out. But I think financials were okay. I would call them maybe a B minus. But the results were in that B minus range, but the reactions were probably a little worse than that. Turning to this week, we're going to have on tap, we got Netflix. We got a little bit broader a scope. So the companies that I put in here are Netflix, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, and General Electric. There are certainly other ones, but those are among the largest market cap companies reporting this week. You can see it's just a little bit broader a scope. You got a consumer discretionary company in there. You've got healthcare, you've got industrial, and you've got consumer staples. Why I put these as interesting components of a diversified portfolio is we'll get to know a little bit more outside of financials. Financials kind of told us that things aren't getting dramatically worse, but they're also not massively accelerating. Now we're going to get from a broader swath of companies and saying what their numbers look like, and especially what they're going to talk about for their 2026 outlooks. So the next 2 weeks will be very important for that. Kind of sets the stage for, hey, what is just the overall market outside of financials seeing going on, and what are they reporting for numbers? And especially starting next week, you'll get to see some of those very large tech companies and the AI-driven companies talking about their earnings growth. Because again, the S&P 500 is very concentrated in these artificial intelligence companies. They're just a big part of the index. So if they start talking numbers down, then the earnings estimates for the S&P 500, it's going to be hard for it to continue to have this trajectory upward that we've seen recently. So big paying attention over the next couple of weeks on what the companies are saying, and especially their outlooks on 2026. Turning to the personal side, Landman. So I've watched season 1 and season 2. Season 1, I had a blast. I thought season 1 was fun. I don't agree with a lot of the stuff they say, whatever. That was irrelevant to me. It's entertainment. It's not news, right? It's a very different story. And I was very entertained by the season 1 story. I thought Billy Bob Thornton was great in season 1. I thought he was still good in season 2, but to be completely honest, I thought season 2 was terrible. It is venturing into what I like to call Homeland territory for me. So if you remember back in the day, I think it was on Showtime. There was a show called Homeland. I think it ran for 8 seasons. I watched the first 2. And season 1 was phenomenal. In fact, I've revisited season 1 a few times because I thought it was really, really, really well done. Season 2, I came in with high expectations and I was like, oh yeah, it's still good. It's still good. It's still good. And then I got towards the end and I'm like, wait, is this terrible? And then by the end of the season, I was like, yeah, this is terrible. That is really where I got to with Landman and this one too, is that season 1 was so good and I was then very entertained by it. I was giving season 2 the benefit of the doubt, and it's like, okay, we're going to kick in here. We're going to kick in here. And by the end of the season, I was like, that's it. It wasn't, I don't know. I just didn't find the story that entertaining. I didn't think they gave Billy Bob enough to do. I think he's really good at what he did in season 1, and I wanted more of that for season 2. And they just veered into other territories, which I wasn't a big fan of. So I don't know. I'm fairly certain. In fact, I don't know if it's been confirmed, but I would assume there's going to be a season 3. I don't know if I'll be there for that one, just because, again, Homeland, I did not watch season 3 because that season 1 was so good and season 2 was so bad. I was just kind of done. So we'll see where we end up on that, but I was not a huge fan of season 2. So that's it for me this week. Tune in next week where we'll have our next hot button topics. Until then, thank you very much and take care.